Right, okay, so the next close study product that we're going to talk about is called I, Daniel Blake. And really what we're exploring here is what is meant by independent cinema and what we mean by success when it comes to films. So the previous one about Doctor Strange was all about financial success, and it was all about star power and making lots of money. This one is a little bit different because this one is going to look at director power, and it's going to look at critical success, and it's going to look at this whole concept around independence. So let's crack on. So to begin with, independent films, they can be incredibly successful. Slumdog Millionaire or Blair Witch, Pulp Fiction, some of the more iconic films of our time are independent films. And what that really means is that they are not made by a large Hollywood conglomerate style company. It usually means that the funding has had to come from an independent source, and that the producers or the directors or even the actors involved have had much more creative input into the film. Effectively, it's a grassroots kind of approach to filmmaking. So rather than relying on star power, a lot of independent films don't always have the budget in order to hire these big A-list celebrities. So they're also a good way for new actors to get noticed or new directors to make their mark. But they can be much harder to distribute and to kind of get themselves out there and promote. And we'll look at how I, Daniel Blake did that specifically. So what is I, Daniel Blake? Well, I, Daniel Blake is a British film that looks at the poverty class within Britain, and it looks at a specific character who has had a poor turn of health, and that has affected his ability to gain meaningful employment. And it's a little bit of a look at the system within the UK in terms of how it supports people who have, for whatever reason, now need financial support. And it's a look at maybe the unfairness of that system, and so it is quite politically charged. So instead of relying on necessarily star power, this film relies on director power, and the director is Ken Loach. And I'm just going to quickly show you some examples of Ken Loach's work, so here's some clips.
I do solemnly swear that to the best of my ability, I will support and defend the government of the Irish Republic.
Did you see our position when you came over the crest of that hill? You did not? You were looking down at your shoes? There'd be clean shoes on your corpse.
Jimmy Hall was killed because he wouldn't say his name in English. Is that what you call a martyr, Teddy, is it?
So we should all buy a one-way ticket to London, is that it, Damien?
You don't do anything stupid, Damien.
Do you realise you've been telling me that since I was 12?
God preserve Ireland if ever your kind take control.
Well, you better start getting used to the idea. I received orders to execute the spies. Not Chris as well.
He's a traitor. It's a war.
Casper! I repeat! You were asleep! Were you, Casper?
I don't know, sir.
I know! You were! You were asleep! Why were you asleep? You errant scoundrel!
I don't know, sir.
They all seem to pick on you, don't they, Casper? Why is it?
Don't know, sir.
Is it because you're a bad one?
Maybe I am sometimes, but I'm not that bad, sir.
This is Billy Casper. Billy Casper cheats, steals, lies, fights. Because he has to. You see, if you're not like the others, if you simply don't belong, then you have to manage alone. Alone. Unless you have a friend, like Kess.
Come on, Kess. Come on, then.
A very special friend, who doesn't mind that you're different,
So you get an idea of this kind of gritty social realism as a genre. Now, for I, Daniel Blake, to try and reach an audience to market, they don't have that big conglomerate company financing everything. So they have to think a little bit more creatively, maybe. And so the way that they marketed was much more of a grassroots approach. So they had a trailer that would have played on other independent films or in other independent locations. As well as that, it will have had a trailer, various posters. There would have been interviews with casts over several media outlets, probably on the BBC, because the BBC partly funded this independent film as part of the BBC's remit. And so there would have been talk shows and TV spots. It did have a website and there would have been some social media usage as well, but nowhere near on the scale of its counterpart Doctor Strange in terms of this course. So some of the multimedia and grassroots options where the Daily Mirror did a spread on I, Daniel Blake. They even changed their masthead to reflect that, and the reason for that will be more apparent when we do our study on the Daily Mirror later on in the course, but it's a left-wing political newspaper, which means that the values being shown in I, Daniel Blake would align very nicely with the Mirror's own values.
Mr. Speaker, could I recommend the Prime Minister supports British cinema and takes herself along to a cinema to see a Palme d'Or winning film, I, Daniel Blake. And while she's doing so, perhaps she could take the Work and Pensions Secretary with her, because he described the film as monstrously unfair and then went on to admit that he'd never seen it. So he's obviously got a very fair sense of judgment on this. But I'll tell the Prime Minister what's monstrously unfair. Ex-servicemen like David Clapson dying without food in his home due to the government's sanctions regime. It is time that we ended this institutionalised barbarity against often very vulnerable people.
Well, Ken Loach joins me now, and with us also the Conservative MP Kwasi Kwarteng. Ken Loach, how typical an experience do you think the one you portray in the film is of negotiating the benefit system?
It's applying to hundreds of thousands of people. If you go around the country, you'll find the food banks in every city. You'll find people getting sanctions all the time. I think it was the year before last, 1 million sanctions. And that means people's lives are thrown in chaos. We found story after story after story. We could have said this film in any city, any corner of the country. So I think this is very typical of what's happening.
And do you make these films to try and change Britain?
No, you make the film to tell a story, to try and say, look, this is happening, this is how we're living, this is, what do you think? If you see the film and you accept that's happening, then what are we going to do about it? But mainly it's just tell a story. And this one's a story of friendship. It's Daniel, 59-year-old, had a heart attack, but the state tells him he has to work. And Katie, single mum, moved out of London, big like many others, and in the social cleansing that's happening in London, she's moved out to the north because the rents are cheaper, where she has no family, no support. And it's the friendship between them and how they survive and the choices they face, which are pretty harsh.
Kwasi Kwarteng, you're probably at a disadvantage. I don't think you've seen the film, have you?
I don't think many people have.
But it's just come out. But you've heard the director's praise.
Absolutely.
Do you accept that there is a scale of suffering of people negotiating the benefit system that is truly shocking?
I think there is some hardship. I mean, it would be wrong to suggest that there is no hardship. But as Ken said, he's telling a story. He's a creative person. And as you said, I mean, Ken has been working for 50 years as a social commentator, as one of our great directors. I have huge respect for his work. But it is creative. I don't think it's an accurate...
I mean, it's not true, is that what you're saying?
Well, I think elements of it are true. But as he said, he's telling a story. There's a place for social commentary. There's a place for, from Dickens right through Ken's work to now. There's lots of place for social commentary. But I don't think it's actually reflecting a broader reality, which is the fact that the government is creating employment. I think the fact is that the economy is growing. Many people said it wasn't growing. And the government was actually re-elected last year. Now, I know Ken is effectively a revolutionary socialist. I know that you were involved in Respect, which is a political party that has advanced left-wing views, and I respect that. But it doesn't really reflect the political reality that people experience.
It's conscious cruelty. This system is imposed with conscious cruelty. We heard so many stories. A man assessed for, has had a heart attack. He's assessed for whether by the state. He has a heart attack in the course of the assessment and is then sanctioned because he doesn't complete it. A man takes his pregnant wife to hospital. She's in premature labour. He misses his appointment. He's sanctioned. No money. Life in chaos. New child. This is consciously cruel. And I'll tell you why we know it, because most people, if they can appeal against their assessment that they're fit for work when they're plainly ill, they will win the appeal. So the state is knowingly putting people through this.
I don't accept
and knowing, well, it's true. Just
there were politicians from the Labour Party who did a kind of YouTube multimedia campaign, the hashtag I am Daniel Blake, or We Are All Daniel Blake, I think was the hashtag.
I'm not a client.
A customer.
Not a service user.
I am not a shirker.
A scrounger. A bigger.
Nor a thief.
I am not a national insurance number.
Nor a blip on a screen. I've paid my dues.
Never a penny short.
I'm proud to do so.
I don't tug the forelock.
But look my neighbour in the eye.
I don't accept or seek charity.
My name is Daniel Blake.
My name is Daniel Blake.
My name is Daniel Blake.
I am a man.
Not a dog.
As such, I demand my rights. I demand you treat me with respect.
I, Daniel Blake.
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 I'm a citizen. Nothing more, nothing less. Thank you.
And so there were lots of messages there. Even the script was illuminated onto the side of buildings just to try and get people's attention. So there's slightly more grassroots approaches to marketing, but still equally quite successful. So it's important to discuss here about types of success, because we talked about the success of Doctor Strange being that it made a lot of money. And for independent films, whilst we've seen they can make lots of money, that's not always kind of the point of independent cinema. Quite often, independent films offer the directors and actors that opportunity to really break away and have their message. It's not really about a boardroom of people, what's going to make the most money, how can we have the most diverse cast, how can we make sure we target all this audience, what's going to generate all of this income. They're not really the decisions that independent film is trying to make. Independent film is really just trying to push through a message. And so I want to keep this video spoiler free, but the message in I, Daniel Blake is not really something that you would imagine a film company like Disney really taking on board and doing. Certainly not the way it ends, or some of the scenes that are really quite difficult to watch at times. So that independent film kind of offers the platform for people to do that, to have a message unfiltered and to really show it their way with their creative style, the way they want. Some of the ways that this film was distributed then, it was distributed via secret cinema. You get these at art centres or youth clubs, or effectively anywhere can be turned into a cinema. So private venues could turn their pub or their lounge into a cinema. They could purchase this and they could sell tickets independently. So that was one way it was distributed. It was also distributed at film festivals where it won some awards, which is again another form of success that isn't necessarily financial success, but it is success to be critically acclaimed or to be valued within that field or industry as a success. At the same time as distributing it, one of the things they also did was they had food banks at some of the and donation stalls at some of these places where you could go and watch the film. And so, as well as having a message to this film, they were actually giving people the opportunity to act on that message as well, to try and help people in need. And so again, that really does reinforce this idea of independent cinema having a message that's not necessarily about just trying to make money, like the Hollywood industry or the flip side of it. So in terms of globalisation, it can be very difficult for independent films to get themselves out there. They lack the funding to draw in that large audience, to market themselves, to campaign, to create all of that experience that people want to go and see these big blockbuster films for. So it can be quite difficult for independent films. And in one sense, you could argue that Hollywood really is making it more difficult for independent films to get themselves out there. On the other hand, you could argue against that, because these great successful films, Passion of the Christ being one of the highest grossing films of all time, despite being an independent film funded and made by Mel Gibson. So there's arguments for and against, but effectively the removal of Hollywood and a big company and a financial incentive is almost the reason why the platform allows so much creativity within the messages that they want to give. One final thing to cover then is the age rating. I, Daniel Blake has an age rating of 15, and whilst it doesn't have any violence or any big explosions or action scenes like we saw in Doctor Strange, it's more about the gritty reality nature of the show. So it's a 15 mostly for the language. Here's a short clip.
Anything else anybody can do today? So what I'm going to have to do is look. I think you're going to put me in for I have to follow the rules. And the thing is, if you're going to be aggressive with me, then I'm going to have to ask.
It's not about me being aggressive.
No, I'm going to have to ask you to leave.
I'm trying to explain to you a situation, and you don't care.
Security.
I don't know why people like you do
Security. Taking you to the decision maker.
It's all the same thing. I don't want to read your language because it's all the same thing.
Listen, I'm sorry, look, but you're going to have to...
I don't... Yeah, all right, thank you. Take your hands off me. I'm going to speak to the manager. I don't want to speak to you. Sorry?
I'm just explaining what's happening here.
No,
Right, come and talk to me then if you've got something to say.
All right. I've tried to explain to the woman, I've never been to Newcastle before. We've just moved up here from London. I've been here a few days. I don't know where I'm going, okay? I was on the bus, it's gone the wrong way. We've run, got off the bus, run, so there wasn't any more late. She just doesn't want to know. She doesn't want to know. And now she's telling me she's going to refer me for a sanction.
What I want you to do is listen to me, okay? The lady's told you what's right. There's rules here, rules that we have to stick to, okay? It isn't against you, but you have a duty.
Listen, I'm not saying it's against
me. You
have
a duty to be here on time.
And I'm explaining to you why I wasn't here on time.
Do you know what?
I got lost.
I understand, right? But what I gather now is the decision maker. The decision maker's going to be sending you a letter through the post. You're going to have to wait for that, and then you get...
Yeah, my kids have got to start school tomorrow. I've got about 12 quid in my purse.
Do you know what?
All because you can't just calm down and listen to people when they talk.
Right,
You all
again,
have to do this.
Do you know what? I've listened to you. You've created a scene. I think
I've created this... No, mate, I've created... If I was going to create a scene, you'd know about it.
You need to leave the building. Sorry, look.
Okay, you need to... This is ridiculous.
Jesus Christ!
What am I supposed to do?
Who's first in this queue?
I am.
Do you mind if this young lass signs on first?
No, you carry on.
There you go. Now you can go back to your desk and let her sign on and do the job that the taxpayer pays you for. This is a bloody disgrace.
Listen, all right? This doesn't have to involve you. Everybody's trying to do their job here and you're creating more of a scene again.
And also for some of the content within there, some of the ideals, if you like, some of the characters have to go through certain ordeals because of the situation they're in. And so the BBFC would rate that and consider that content to be a 15. Okay, right, so to summarise the I, Daniel Blake case study, it is an independent film. And hopefully you all understand that independent means that the funding hasn't come from a big conglomerate style company, and in this case it's come from lots of small companies who have all paid a little bit towards it in order to fund Ken Loach's vision to create this film. And hopefully you can compare that in terms of Doctor Strange, so the contrasting styles of funding and marketing a film. So director power was used rather than star power. The cast are relatively unknown, but the director is well known for this kind of gritty social realism, and so people who are a fan of his work will probably want to go and watch this. So that director power is a different approach, and it's one that's used in I, Daniel Blake. It was promoted using grassroots approaches. It had all the traditional methods of a trailer, TV spots, posters, but effectively the way that they were distributed out into cinemas and the kind of audience and how they targeted them was very much a grassroots approach, using the Daily Mirror, using politicians, using social media to try and get a message out there. And finally, independent cinema struggles on a global scale, but that's sort of natural because the message is very niche. It's about a working class British man up north in Newcastle struggling to get by. So is it for a global audience? It might be, it might not be. And so the argument here is whether or not independent cinema is really looking for the financial success that Hollywood needs in order to keep funding all of that other stuff, or whether they're looking for that critical success where they make a message and they send it out and then people respond to that in certain different ways. So hopefully you understand now how that financial aspects from the two different types of films kind of affect that success and what those different elements of success look like. Right, so that's it for Daniel Blake.
Thank you. Now, can I have a look at your CV?
CV?
For over 50 years, Ken Loach's films have provided a social commentary of the hardships facing the poor in Britain.
Is an agreement between you and the state.
His most recent offering, I, Daniel Blake, is no different.
I'm desperate to go back to work, unless the doctor tells us.
After suffering a heart attack, Blake is told by his doctor he is too ill to work, but if he doesn't look for employment, his benefits will be stopped through a process called sanctions.
And it's this Saturday.
No thanks, I'll sort that out on my own.
No, Mr. Blake. This is a formal direction.
I think people are consciously punished for their poverty, for their unemployment. The detail of how people are trapped and tripped up, you can see it in, for example, in the way assessments are done.
What happens if I don't?
Then you will be referred for a sanction.
The year before this film was shot, there was something like up to around about 1 million people sanctioned. That's 500,000 times the misery of I, Daniel Blake.
Although the film is a piece of fiction, for some, the life in I, Daniel Blake is a grim reality. Stuart was sanctioned, and as a result became homeless.
I lost my job and things went from bad to worse. I've had to step into a job centre and they've told me I've had to sign on to a benefit called Job Seekers Allowance. With JSA, you've got to do job search, and because I've got learning difficulties and I did struggle to fill out the forms where I didn't do the job search because I wasn't able to, they've sanctioned me